Have you ever noticed that sometimes we can become so focused on healing that we forget we're actually supposed to be living? Maybe that sounds strange. After all, healing matters. Healing changes us. Healing gives us language for things we've carried for years. It helps us understand why we react the way we do, why certain relationships hurt so deeply, why we struggle to trust, why we silence ourselves. Healing is beautiful. Healing is sacred. But somewhere along the way, many of us quietly turn healing into another finish line. We tell ourselves, when I finally heal, when I finally stop feeling anxiety, when I'm more confident, when I've worked through my childhood, when I finally trust myself, when I lose weight, when I become a better version of myself, then I'll travel, I'll write a book, I'll change careers, I'll love more freely, I'll rest. I'll say yes to the things that light me up. I'll finally begin living. But what if we've been asking the wrong question? What if healing was never meant to become our identity? What if healing was never supposed to be the place where we live? What if healing was simply the doorway to life? That's what I want to talk about today, because I have a feeling someone listening today has spent years doing the work. You've read the books, you've listened to podcasts, you've gone to therapy, you've journaled, you've cried, you've reflected, you've forgiven, you've grown, and yet there's still this quiet feeling that says, I'm waiting for permission, waiting until you're enough, waiting until you feel ready, waiting until you're certain, waiting until you finally become the person you've been trying so hard to become. My friend, what if that day never comes? Not because you failed, but because it was never supposed to be. Maybe, just maybe, life has been waiting for you all along. Hey, everybody, I want to welcome you back to the Soul Talk podcast and back to the week 5 of the Connected, the Courage to Stay Real series. I'm so grateful that you're here today. If this is your first time listening, my name is Mary Beth Rim. For nearly 3 decades, I've had the privilege of walking beside people through some of the hardest seasons of their lives. And as a licensed clinical social worker, a coach, and simply as another human being trying to make sense of what it means to live a meaningful life. But here's something you should know about me. I don't believe we're here to be perfect. I don't believe we're here to spend our lives fixing ourselves. I don't believe healing means becoming someone completely different. I think healing at its very best is remembering who you were before fear convinced you otherwise, remembering your own voice, remembering your own worth, remembering that your body has never been your enemy, remembering that you belong, not someday, not after enough work, now, right now. That's what this podcast is about. It's about having honest conversations that help us come back to ourselves so we can build relationships with ourselves and with others that feel safe, honest, and alive. And if these conversations have been meaningful for you, would you take a moment to subscribe to my podcast? And if you're watching on YouTube, I'd love for you to subscribe there as well. Every time you subscribe, leave a review, or share an episode with someone you love, you're helping this community reach people who may be quietly searching for hope. Also, if you're looking for even more encouragement through the week, I'd love to invite you to join me over on Substack, where I share some reflections, articles, and resources that continue these conversations in a deeper way. Thank you for allowing me to be a small part of your week. Now, let's take a breath together and let's talk. Over the past month, we've been on a journey together. Not a journey toward becoming someone else, but a journey toward coming home. See, we've talked about the relationship that shapes every other relationship, the one you have with yourself. We've talked about listening instead of judging. We've talked about the places where we slowly lose ourselves. We've talked about belonging, not earning it, not proving it, belonging. We spent an entire week learning what it means to feel at home in our own bodies, to stop treating our bodies like projects and begin treating them like lifelong companions. And I hope somewhere over these last few weeks, something inside you has softened. Maybe not dramatically. Maybe not in a way anyone else could notice. But perhaps you've caught yourself speaking more gently to yourself. Maybe you've paused before criticizing your reflection. Maybe you've noticed your body asking for rest instead of pushing through. Maybe you've allowed yourself to cry without apologizing. Maybe you've taken a walk, not because you were trying to burn calories, but because it simply felt good to move. Those moments matter more than you know, because healing is rarely dramatic. It's usually incredibly ordinary. It's found in one kinder thought, one deeper breath, one honest conversation, one moment where you choose compassion instead of criticism. And those moments begin to change us quietly, almost without us realizing it. But eventually, something interesting happens. A question begins to emerge. Not because healing is over. Healing is never over. We're always growing. We're always learning. We're always becoming. But the question changes. It moves from how do I heal to how do I live? I think that's one of the most beautiful questions a person can ask because it's no longer rooted in fear. It's rooted in possibility. I'd like to share something with you because there was a season in my own life when I realized I had become incredibly good at achieving, at doing, at caring for everyone else, at checking the next box, and making sure everything looked okay from the outside. And if you had asked me back then how I was doing, I probably would have smiled and told you I was fine because that's what many of us do. We're functioning. We're productive. We're responsible. We're dependable. But functioning isn't the same thing as living. I think for many years, I believe that if I could just keep working hard enough, helping enough, learning enough, becoming enough, there would come a day when I could finally relax, when I could finally enjoy my life. Maybe you've believed that too. Maybe you've been waiting for the perfect moment to begin, the perfect body, the perfect job, the perfect relationship, the perfect bank account, the perfect version of yourself. But life has a funny way of reminding us that perfection keeps moving. There's always another milestone, another achievement, another reason to postpone joy, another reason to believe we're not quite ready. And one day, I found myself asking a question that completely shifted the way I saw my own life. Not, what else do I need to fix? But what if this is my life? Not the rehearsal, not the practice round, not the warm up. This, this ordinary Tuesday, this morning coffee, this walk with the dogs, this run, this conversation, this season, this body, this life. What if I'm not waiting for my life to begin? What if it's already here? And honestly, that question changed something inside me because I realized I'd spent years preparing to live instead of simply living. That's why I believe today's conversation matters so much, because I think there comes a point in every healing journey when we gently stop asking, what's wrong with me? And we begin asking, how do I want to live? And those are two completely different questions. One keeps us searching, the other begins leading us home. In the next part of our conversation, I want to explore why so many of us have learned to live from the outside in, and how often, without realizing it, we begin handing our identity over to achievement, approval, productivity, and other people's expectations. Because understanding why we do that is the first step toward learning a different way to live, a life that grows from the inside out. So I left you with a question. How did we get here? How did so many of us become people who spend our lives looking outside ourselves for answers, outside ourselves for approval, outside ourselves for worth, outside ourselves for permission? Because here's what I believe. I don't think any of us were born doubting ourselves. I don't think a little child comes into the world thinking, I wonder if I'm enough. No. Children come into the world curious, open, expressive. They laugh loudly. They cry honestly. They dance without wondering who's watching. They ask questions without worrying if they'll sound foolish. They don't wake up wondering if they deserve to take up space. Somewhere they learn that. And I think that's an important distinction, because if we learned it, we can also learn something new. One of the things I've learned after nearly 30 years of sitting with people is this: very few people intentionally abandon themselves. They adapt. There's a difference. They learn what helps them belong, what keeps the peace, what earns approval, what avoids criticism, what feels safe. Sometimes that means becoming the helper, sometimes the achiever, sometimes the peacemaker, sometimes the funny one, sometimes the invisible one, sometimes the child who never asks for too much. These aren't flaws, they're brilliant adaptations. They're the ways our nervous system quietly whispers, if I do this, maybe I'll be loved. Think about that for a moment. Not maybe I'll succeed, not maybe I'll be admired. Deep underneath all of it, maybe I'll belong. Because belonging has always been one of our deepest human needs. We aren't wired to survive alone. We're wired for connection. From the very beginning of life, our brains are asking one question: am I safe with you? That question shapes far more of our lives than we realize. I think that's why so many adults carry around an exhaustion they can't quite explain. They're not simply tired from doing too much. They're tired from constantly monitoring, reading the room, trying to keep everyone comfortable, wondering if they said the wrong thing, replaying conversations on the drive home, trying not to disappoint, trying not to be too much, trying not to be too little, trying to fit, trying to belong. And here's the heartbreaking part. Most of us become so accustomed to living this way, we mistake it for our personality. We say, oh, I'm just a people pleaser. I'm just an overthinker. I've always been anxious. I'm just hard on myself. But what if those aren't actually who you are? What if they're simply strategies you learned? Strategies that once protected you, but no longer serve the life you're trying to build. That possibility is incredibly hopeful because strategies can change. Identity is something much deeper. You know, one of my favorite things about running has never been about races. People are often surprised when I say that. I've run a lot of races over the years. I've crossed plenty of finish lines. Those moments are wonderful, but they're fleeting. What I love most has always been what running teaches me about paying attention. Some mornings my body says, let's go. Other morning it whispers, slow down. Some days the strongest thing I could do is just to keep moving. Other days the wisest thing I can do is rest. See, years ago I measured every run by pace, distance, calories, performance. Now I'm much more interested in one question. What is my body telling me today? That shift didn't just change the way I run. It changed the way I live. Because I realized if I couldn't listen to my own body while I was running, how often was I ignoring it everywhere else? Maybe you've experienced something similar. Maybe your body has been whispering for years, slow down, rest, cry, laugh, move, speak, stop, stay. And because we've spent so much of our lives looking outward, we've forgotten how to hear inward. I wonder, when was the last time you made a decision that genuinely reflected what was true for you? Not what everyone else expected, not what looked impressive, not what you thought you should do, but what actually felt deeply aligned. Sometimes people tell me, I don't even know what I want anymore. I understand that. Because if you spent years listening to everyone else's voice, your own voice can become very quiet. Not gone, just quiet. And here's the beautiful news. Quiet voices can be heard again. Not by forcing, but by creating enough stillness to listen. I think one of the greatest tragedies in our culture is that we've confused productivity with purpose, busy with meaningful, achievement with fulfillment. We become experts at filling our calendars while quietly starving our souls. We've rewarded for doing more, responding faster, producing constantly, being available all the time. But no one hands us an award for presence. No one congratulates us for eating lunch slowly, for taking a walk with our phone, for saying, that's enough for today, for watching the sunset, for sitting on the porch, for breathing. Yet those moments are often where life actually happens. There's a quote I've always loved. The days are long, but the years are short. As I've gotten older, that quote has taken on an entirely different meaning. Because I don't want to arrive at the end of my life realizing I was always preparing for it, always waiting, always becoming. I want to know I was here, really here, paying attention, feeling it, living it. Not perfectly, but honestly. Maybe that's what living from the inside out really is. It's paying attention. It's noticing. It's becoming present enough to ask, what is the true right now? Not yesterday, not 10 years ago, not who everyone expects me to be, but today, what feels true? What matters? What brings life into this ordinary moment? Because life isn't waiting somewhere in the future. It's unfolding in this conversation, this breath, today, this ordinary day. As we begin to answer those questions, something remarkable starts happening. Our choices begin changing, not because someone tells us what to do, but because who we are begins shaping how we live. And that's where we're headed next. Because in this final part of today's conversation, I want to explore what living from the inside out actually looks like. Not as another self-improvement project, but as a quiet, everyday practice. A life where your calendar, your conversations, your relationships, your work, your movement, your rest, all begin reflecting the person you've been rediscovering all along. And my friend, that's where healing quietly becomes living. And we've been talking today. I wonder if you've noticed something. Living from the inside out isn't really about changing who you are. It's about remembering who you are and allowing your life to begin reflecting that. There's a difference. Because for so many years, many of us have believed that growth means becoming someone else, someone more confident, more disciplined, more successful, more organized, more productive, more spiritual, more something. As if the person we are today isn't enough to begin living. But what if growth isn't about adding more? What if it's about uncovering what's already there? What if beneath all the expectations, beneath the roles you've played, beneath the striving, beneath the proving, there's been a steady, wise, deeply grounded version of you quietly waiting to be heard? I believe there is. Not because I've read it in a book, because I've watched it happen. I've watched people who spent years believing they were broken slowly begin to realize they weren't broken at all. They were disconnected. And there's a profound difference between those two things. Broken implies something needs to be repaired. Disconnected simply means something can be found again. That to me is one of the most hope-filled truths we can carry. You know, one of the questions I ask myself more often now is this: does my life reflect what I say matters most? Not my intentions, not my goals, not my dreams, my life. Because our lives are always tell the truth. We can say our health is important and never rest. We can say our family matters and never be fully present. We can say we value peace while filling every empty moment with noise. We can say we believe we belong while spending every day trying to earn it. Our calendars tell stories. Our habits tell stories. Our conversations tell stories. Even the way we speak to ourselves tells a story. The question is it the story you want to be living? That isn't meant to create guilt. It's meant to create awareness. Because awareness is where change begins, not shame. Never shame. Shame makes us hide. Awareness invites us home. And one of the greatest gifts of living from the inside out is that life begins to feel less reactive. Think about how many decisions we make every day. Most of them happen almost automatically. If someone sends a message, we immediately respond. Someone asks us to do something, we immediately say yes. We feel uncomfortable, we immediately distract ourselves. We're tired, we keep going. We're lonely, we scroll. We're overwhelmed, we push harder. Our lives become one long series of reactions. But living from the inside out creates something incredibly precious. A pause. Just enough space between what happens and how we respond. That pause may only last a few seconds, but in those few seconds, everything can change. Instead of asking, what should I do? We begin asking, what reflects who I am? Those are very different questions. So can I tell you something I've been learning myself? As I've gotten older, I've become less interested in having a full life and much more interested in having a meaningful one. For years, I confused those two things. A full calendar made me feel productive. Helping everyone made me feel valuable. Accomplishing more made me feel successful. But somewhere along the way, I realized that a full life and a meaningful life aren't always the same thing. Sometimes they're opposites. Sometimes fullness crowds out presence. Sometimes busyness drowns out joy. Sometimes productivity leaves no room for wonder. And I don't want that anymore. I want a life where I notice things, where I notice the sunrise on an early run, where I notice my husband's laughter, where I notice the quiet joy of sitting with my dogs, where I notice the way my body says, thank you for slowing down, where I notice conversations instead of rushing through them, where I notice the people standing right in front of me. Because isn't that what connection really is? Paying attention. One of the things I love most about running isn't crossing the finish line. It's what happens somewhere around any of those miles that I'm running. Because the noise starts fading. My breathing finds its rhythm. The pace settles. And suddenly, I'm not trying to force the run anymore. I'm just simply running. And that's a beautiful metaphor in that. Because I think that's what happens in life too. When we stop forcing ourselves to become someone, we finally begin living as ourselves. Not perfectly, not effortlessly, but honestly. And honestly, that's enough. Living from the inside out also changes the questions we ask ourselves. Instead of, what will people think? We ask what feels true. Instead of, how do I prove myself? We ask, how do I express myself? Instead of, what if I fail? We ask, what if I regret never trying? Instead of, what do they need from me? We gently begin asking, what do I need in order to stay connected to myself? That isn't selfish. It's responsible. Because we can't afford our true selves to anyone else if we become strangers to ourselves. One of the most beautiful changes I've seen in people happens quietly. They begin trusting themselves, not because they suddenly know all the answers, but because they stop abandoning their own wisdom. They stop arguing with every feeling. They stop second guessing every decision. They stop apologizing for taking up space. They begin listening, really listening to their bodies, to their values, to their intuition, to the still small voice that has been patiently waiting beneath all the noise. That voice has always been there. It hasn't disappeared. It's simply been competing with someone else's expectations. So maybe this week, instead of trying to become a better version of yourself, you simply practice becoming a more present version of yourself. When you wake up tomorrow morning, before reaching for your phone, take one slow breath. Ask yourself, what kind of person do I want to be today? Not what do I need to accomplish? Not how much can I get done? Simply, how do I want to show up? Imagine how different our lives would feel if that became a daily practice. Not chasing, not proving, not performing, just showing up as the truest version of ourselves we can be that day. Some days that will look strong. Some days it will look tender. Some days it will look joyful. Some days it will look like rest. All of it belongs. Because living from the inside out isn't about perfection. It's about congruence. It's about allowing your outer life to become an honest reflection of your inner life. And here's what I believe begins happening next. When your life starts reflecting who you truly are, your relationships begin changing too. Not because you've learned a better communication technique, not because you've memorized healthier boundaries, but because you're bringing a different version of yourself into every room you enter, a version that no longer has to perform for belonging, a version that knows their worth isn't up for negotiation, a version that can listen without disappearing, a version that can love without losing themselves. That's where we're going together next week. Because once you've learned to live from the inside out, you begin discovering something remarkable. The healthiest relationships are the ones where you don't have to hold your breath. The healthiest relationships are the ones that let you exhale. As we begin to close our conversation today, I want to leave you with one final thought. Actually, it's less of a thought and more of an invitation. What if just for this week, you stop trying to become a better version of yourself? I know that probably sounds strange coming from someone who has spent nearly 30 years helping people grow. But hear me out, because growth isn't the same thing as striving. Growth isn't waking up every morning thinking, oh, how much more do I need to fix? Growth isn't another impossible standard to live up to. Growth, real growth, is allowing who you truly are to become visible. It's allowing your life to slowly catch up to your heart. I think so many of us have spent years believing we're one breakthrough away from finally being enough. One promotion, one relationship, one number on the scale, one achievement, one accomplishment, one healed wound, one more course, one more podcast, one more book. Before we know it, our entire lives become preparation. Preparation to live, preparation to rest, preparation to be happy, preparation to belong. But my friends, what if your life isn't waiting somewhere in the future? What if it's happening right here, today, in this ordinary moment? One of the greatest lessons running has taught me is that life isn't lived at the finish line. It's lived between them. It's lived in the quiet morning when no one is watching. It's lived in the decision to lace up my shoes. It's lived in the steady rhythm of your breathing. It's lived in choosing to keep going when things feel hard. Most runners know this. The medal's wonderful. The finish line is exciting, but those moments last only a few minutes. The real experience, the one that changes you, happens mile after mile, step after step, breath after breath. And I think life is exactly the same. We're often chasing finish lines. I'll be happy when, I'll slow down when, I'll finally enjoy when. But life keeps whispering, it's happening now, not someday, now. There's another question I've been carrying with me lately. Maybe it's because I've reached a season in my life where time feels different. Maybe it's because I've sat with so many people who've reached the end of their lives, wishing they'd spent less time worrying and more time living. Or maybe it's simply because I'm learning too. The question is this: what kind of memories am I creating with the ordinary days I've been given? Not vacations, not milestones, not birthdays, or ordinary Tuesdays or quiet Wednesday mornings, a walk with the dogs, sitting and having breakfast with my husband, a conversation with a friend, a run where the sunrise catches me by surprise. Because one day, those ordinary moments become our lives. And I don't want to miss them because I was too busy preparing for a future that kept me moving farther away. After nearly 30 years of listening to people's stories, I don't think most people regret not accomplishing more. I think they regret not being more present, not speaking the words they wished they'd spoken. not spending more time with people they loved, not trusting themselves sooner, not taking the trip, not starting the business, not writing the book, not believing they were worthy before they had proof. The last one stays with me because I wonder how many beautiful lives remain unlived simply because someone kept waiting until they felt worthy enough to begin. Can I tell you something I hope you'll remember? Worthiness isn't something you earn by living well. It's what allows you to live well. There's a difference. Is you don't earn belonging, you live from it. You don't earn love, you receive it. You don't earn your place in the world, you discover it. And once you begin believing that, everything changes. It's really what living from the inside out means. It's waking up every morning and remembering, I don't have to prove I'm enough today. I simply have to show up honestly. Some days that honesty will look like courage. Other days it'll look like rest. Some days it will look like forgiveness. Other days it will look like saying, I need help. Some days it will look like laughter. And others, it may look like tears. All of it belongs. Because all of it is human. Before we finish today, I'd love to leave you with one last question. Not a question to answer, a question to carry with you. One you can return to while driving, walking, washing dishes, or lying in bed tonight. So here it is. If I truly believed I belonged, how would I live today? Not next year, not after you've fixed everything. Today. Would you speak differently? Would you rest differently? Would you move your body differently? Would you look in the mirror differently? Would you spend your time differently? Would you say yes? Would you say no? Would you trust yourself just a little more? That single question has the power to quietly reshape a life. Because once we begin living as though we already belong, our choices naturally begin changing. Not because we're trying harder, because we're living truer. And one of the reasons I created the connection method is because I believe understanding is only the beginning. Insight is beautiful, but insight alone does not change a life. Practice does. And the connection method was created to help you move beyond simply understanding yourself and into the daily practice of living from who you truly are. The 12-week program is about learning to build relationships, first with yourself and then with others, that feel grounded, honest, safe, and deeply connected. And if today's conversation stirred something inside you, I'd love to invite you to explore it when the time feels right. There's no pressure. There's no perfect starting point, just an open door. Because that's how real growth happens, not by rushing, by returning again and again and again. So as we close today, I want to thank you. Thank you for trusting me with your time. Thank you for walking through these first 5 weeks together. I know that showing up for yourself isn't always easy. I know there are days when it's much simpler to slip back into those old patterns than it is to choose a new way of living. But every time you pause, every time you listen to your own heart, every time you choose compassion instead of criticism, you're building something. You're building a life that reflects who you really are. And that's extraordinary. Next week, our conversation begins to widen because once we've learned to come home to ourselves, the question naturally becomes, how do I bring this version of me into my relationships? How do I stay present when conflict shows up? How do I love without disappearing? How do I create relationships where I don't have to perform or pretend or constantly prove my worth? I think one of the greatest gifts we can ever experience is this: being with someone and realizing you can finally breathe. You don't have to earn your place. You don't have to monitor every word. You don't have to become someone different to be accepted. You simply get to be. That's where we're headed next week. We're going to begin exploring relationships that let you exhale, because healthy relationships don't ask you to become less of yourself. They create enough safety that you become more of yourself. So be gentle with yourself. Take one slow breath before you rush into tomorrow. Notice the ordinary moments. Trust the quiet wisdom that's already within you. And remember, you don't have to spend your life becoming someone worthy of love. You already are. Now go live like it's true. Till next time, I'm Mary Beth Rim.